This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Hello, everyone, or in this case, meets a whole decade's worth of issues. Here from Newsweek.com is a kind of time-lapse speed video recap of nearly all the big news stories of the past 10 years. Tonight, let's watch 2000 to 2003, collapsed into 2 minutes and 22 seconds.
Here's everything you need to know about the first decade of the 21st century in 7 minutes. The globe fears the Y2K bug.
Y2K.
The ball drops. Planes don't fall out of the sky. The new century's first crisis is averted. Thanks to Budweiser, Americans have a new greeting. Federal agents seize 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez in Miami. He's sent back to Cuba.
Elian is safe.
The GOP nominates George W. Bush.
So help me God.
Democrats choose Al Gore. The first crew of the International Space Station moves in, just days before the closest election ever.
Gore has retracted his concession.
Florida becomes the center of the universe. Recounts, butterfly ballots, hanging chads, and Katherine Harris enter the lexicon. 36 long days later, the U.S. Supreme Court halts the recount. W wins the presidency. Gore later wins an Oscar. Bush is sworn in as number 43.
God bless America.
Not everyone is happy. Bush signs a huge tax cut into law. Many people are happy. Apple unveils the iPod.
What is iPod?
White earbuds become the decade's top accessory. September 11th, World Trade Center, the Pentagon, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 die. Americans unite, flags everywhere. The U.S. invades Afghanistan. The Taliban falls, but Osama bin Laden escapes. Bush signs the Patriot Act. A decade-long constitutional fight begins. Anthrax scare makes opening the mail a very scary proposition. Everyone blames the terrorists. An American Airlines flight crashes in New York. Everyone blames the terrorists. Turns out to be pilot error. Looking for an escape? The world is captivated by a movie about a boy magician. Homeland Security unveils color-coded terrorism alerts. Yellow is bad, orange is worse. Halle Berry becomes the first black woman to win the Best Actress Oscar. She cries a lot. American Idol premieres. Simon's the jerk.
Dreadful.
Paula's the sweet kooky one. Randy says dog.
Check it out, dog.
Congress authorizes military force. Wait, aren't we already at war? Terrorist bombs kill more than 200 in Bali. CIA Director George Tenet says the case against Saddam Hussein is a slam dunk. He's wrong.
That's my fault.
Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrates over Texas. Another hit to America's morale. Colin Powell makes a case against Iraq at the UN. He says Saddam Hussein is tied to Al-Qaeda.
Iraq, Al-Qaeda, Saddam Hussein, and Laden.
He's wrong. Shock and awe. Baghdad falls. Iraqis pull down a Saddam statue. They beat it with shoes. Mission accomplished. Or not. Martha Stewart goes to prison nicknamed Camp Cupcake. A blackout darkens much of the Northeast. Sweaty New Yorkers camp out on the streets. Madonna kisses Britney. California voters elect the Terminator.
We are California.
Saddam Hussein is found in a hole.
We got him.
He needs a shave.
Well, that's what counts as the good old days this decade. We will sprint through more of the decade between now and New Year's when the decade ends. And we haven't figured out what to call it yet. The O's, the zeros, the aughts. The way this decade has gone, I would recommend the ought-nots. Tonight on our program, who can stop a billion people from blogging and tweeting? We will look behind President Obama's call this week for uncensored internet in China. Then, as usual, our video picks of the week, plus a new way to fund investigative reporting, micro-donations to the journalist of your choice, and a parallel development in education, micro-donations to the classroom of your choice.
My colleagues and I were talking about books that we wanted our students to read, field trips we wanted to take them on, art supplies that we needed, but these ideas wouldn't go beyond the teacher's lunchroom. And then I just figured that there were people from all walks of life who wanted to help improve our public schools.
Innovative, but do micro-donations build community or fragment it? We will address this later. But first, the Great Firewall of China. At a town hall meeting with students in Shanghai this week, President Obama put some gentle pressure on the Chinese leadership, saying that internet censorship was a bad idea. Let's take a look.
But I am a big believer in technology, and I'm a big believer in openness when it comes to the flow of information. I think that the more freely information flows, the stronger the society becomes. Because then citizens of countries around the world can hold their own governments accountable. They can begin to think for themselves. That generates new ideas. It encourages creativity. And so I've always been a strong supporter of open internet use. I'm a big supporter of non-censorship. This is part of the tradition of the United States that I discussed before, and I recognize that You know, different countries have different traditions. I can tell you that in the United States, the fact that we have free internet or unrestricted internet access is a source of strength, and I think should be encouraged.
Ironically, few Chinese may ever see the president's words. A transcript of the speech posted online was taken down by censors after just 27 minutes. What is the state of web censorship in China? Will the Great Firewall inevitably collapse from the sheer volume of users? Joining us are two experts who have experience living and working around web censorship in China. Madeline Earp is Asia Research Associate at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Andrew Lee wrote The Wikipedia Revolution and directs new media in the Annenberg School at the University of Southern California. He joins us from there via Skype. Welcome, both of you, to the program. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Andrew, want to start and tell us more or less what is the state of internet censorship in China? How specific is it?
Well, you know, I was based in Beijing while writing my book about Wikipedia. Well, technically the entire website of Wikipedia was blocked there, so certainly that created a challenge and required me to become an expert in how to circumvent the Great Firewall. In general, there are controls on all the websites in China that operate with what they call Internet Content Provider's License. So every single website needs to be licensed by the government there, so they all employ a staff of censors to watch content, to look at chat forums, to look at message boards, and to take down anything that does not meet the required approved conversations that happen there. But what's surprising is still there's a lot that gets by. The internet users there have been quite clever in coming up with coded ways of discussing things quite openly. There's been a whole style of humor and of satire that's been developed around the whole idea that you need to get around the censors. So it is quite interesting to see the types of creativity that have cropped up because of the censorship there.
Can you give me an example of online anti-censorship humor?
Well, one of the more famous examples is the past premier of China, Jiang Zemin, kind of exited office by declaring something he called the three represents, his kind of philosophy on things. In Chinese, that's called 三个代表. And if you rearrange those characters, it kind of sounds like you're wearing three watches. So people on the internet in China started making fun of this slogan by the former leader of China by, you know, wearing three watches or showing photos of three watches there, and criticizing a lot of these kind of jingoistic terms that politicians push around but really have no meaning to the general public. So you see a lot of these types of humor being developed on the internet simply because they can't have open discussion of politics, so why not have some fun and in the process poke some holes in some of these political statements there.
So, Madeline, that's funny, but do people go to jail for jokes like that?
I'm afraid that's the less funny side, Brian. My organisation, CPJ, publishes an annual census of imprisoned journalists around the world, and I'm currently working on the figures for China for this year. Last year it was 28. That's more than any other country. China has actually topped the list for the past decade. Now, of course, in terms of China's enormous number of internet users, over 300 million, that's a small figure. But what's difficult about being a blogger or about being a journalist who posts online is that there is a line that you might cross. And maybe you're a dissident who purposely, you know, goes right up to the line, maybe puts your toe across it, tries to work out, you know, how to push it forward. But maybe you're just a regular internet user who stumbled across something that offends a powerful figure, who can then use technology to track you down and charge you with a crime.
And I think I saw a stat from your organization that said of those 28 journalists imprisoned in China last year, that 24 of them published primarily online.
That's absolutely right, and that's a global trend. So last year, 1 in 3 of the journalists on our global census worked online. In China, it's particularly the case that we used to see professional journalists being punished through the legal system in this way. Increasingly, it's journalists who are working without the protection of a news organization that maybe, has political affiliation or, has editors that can pull a story back if it's too sensitive. These are people who are maybe sending things overseas to dissident websites overseas. Maybe they're just maintaining a personal website. Often we've seen people writing about humanitarian issues or environmental issues after the Sichuan earthquake last year, for example. These are the kinds of people who are vulnerable at the moment.
I want you both to see a video that we have of Yahoo fingering a reporter, China-related, and then Congress being very tough on Yahoo's boss for what was done. Let's watch.
Yahoo has come in for particular criticism. It helped the Chinese authorities track down a journalist named She Tao, who's now been jailed.
Under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you are about to give.
For this, the company's executives were called before a U.S. congressional committee last year.
If you think our witnesses today are uncomfortable sitting in this climate-controlled room and accounting for their company's spineless and irresponsible actions, imagine how life is for She Tao, spending 10 long years in a Chinese dungeon for exchanging information publicly.
Now, that was a couple of years ago. As some of you know, Congressman Tom Lantos there passed away last year. He was the only Holocaust survivor ever to serve in Congress, so he knows something about human rights. And Andrew Lee, were you familiar with the case involving Yahoo and that journalist there, and more broadly with the role of providers like Yahoo and Google in being complicit with the Chinese government?
Yes, I was actually a journalism professor in Hong Kong at the time, and it was a big issue at the, during that era. It certainly is a big problem for U.S. companies to have servers and computers in China that have personal information. Because once your computer is inside the sovereign borders of a country, you have to abide by their laws or their enforcement. So if you know that those things are going to endanger your clients, your customers, and you don't feel that those rules are fair, you shouldn't have computers with that information in China. So that's my basic advice, would be that Yahoo should not have those types of computers holding personal information if they know these things are in jeopardy. Google, for example, does not have the same problem, because while Google does have a presence in China and they do have a search engine there, they don't hold any personal information of its users in servers in China. They're all hosted in places outside of China. So they don't have the same issue of a Chinese court or Chinese authorities marching up with a piece of paper saying, we demand that you hand over this personal information. And this is something that every single .com and any company related to internet content has to deal with when dealing with China, and the best advice is not to have it there. Don't even let it be a problem. And this is something about corporate responsibility and whether you're looking out for your customers or not.
But Google, Madeline, whose motto is do no evil, does engage in restrictions in conjunction with the Chinese government, don't they?
Well, all corporations who are providing services to Chinese users are making a choice. Some search engines like Google have chosen to block sites, but to let users know that they have been blocked. What corporations are also starting to do, which is very promising, is considering best practices and consulting with academics and with NGOs to try and...
So you're saying if you have no choice but to do this, if you're there at all, at least disclose what you're doing.
That's the choice that they've made. People have different opinions as to whether they've made a bargain, with the devil in order to sell their product or not.
Andrew, real quick, before we run out of time, do the Chinese people, most of the billion of them, care about this, or is this the purview of people like us sitting around tables and video monitors in the West?
Well, as much as I agree with the CPJ's comments, I think it's important to note that the internet has vastly changed how people interact in China. On balance, it's been a huge net positive in terms of more transparency. Of course, you're comparing to a pretty bad state of affairs beforehand, but it's brought huge change in terms of how they use instant messaging, how they collaborate, how they've exchanged information, how they've kept local governments accountable for certain tragedies, and I think on balance, huge plus. The strange thing is that most citizens there believe that the government should have a role in controlling content on the internet. The latest polls, it was done with Pew, it was done with the Markle Foundation and with a very respectable Academy of Social Sciences there, said that 80% of Chinese citizens believed in some type of government controls on content.
In pursuit of what? In pursuit of what, Andrew?
I'm sorry?
In pursuit of what?
Mostly about pornography and lewd content. When it came to political information, most of the citizens there said you don't need that much control on political information, but it was the same kind of concerns you see in Middle America in the U.S. is pornography and bad information and spamming and those types of things.
10 seconds. Are 60 million bloggers just going to overwhelm the censorship infrastructure soon enough?
There's a very strong chance that they will. What we see is a constant push and pull between the two sides, and we obviously hope that the bloggers will win out.
Thank you both very much for joining us on this week that President Obama is in China, brings some light to this issue. And a final note from China, it's the story of Mark DeSanjo, an artist, musician, and businessman who moved to the Chinese boomtown of Shenzhen. Mark happens to be President Obama's half-brother. Here's a brief clip from a Reuters video reported by James Pomfret.
Emotionally, I needed to be in someplace new, someplace where I could start to re-evaluate myself and to start from scratch.
Besides his artistic pursuits and charity work teaching the piano to Chinese orphans, DeSanjo runs several businesses, including a barbecue restaurant popular for its beer and hearty cuisine. Some of his Chinese staff said it was unbelievable to have the president's brother as their boss.
I felt great surprise and a little excited. But for me, I will do the job as normal.
Other Shenzhen residents hope for improved Sino-US relations with an Obama sibling now living in China.
Obama's brother coming and living in China is a pleasant surprise to us. We welcome him. I think it's very important that China and US understand each other.
He spoke little of his relationship with his famous brother, who has the same father but a different mother, but said the successful presidential campaign last year had helped heal the family's wounds.
And it was Barack who supported me and inspired me to continue in many ways.
Gifted family. That's the same brother with a new book about the Obamas. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Here are this week's online video picks. Number 1, Good Magazine is publicizing a new technology to help police and medical personnel get as quickly as possible to the scene of a gunshot. Check it out.
Before ShotSpotter, if you're out here and you're driving in a car, you've got this window open, you don't have any other windows open, you hear gunfire, it's going to sound like it's over here. It's very frustrating because those seconds and minutes are critical to saving somebody's life. The information is sent out to the officers in the field. For instance, in this case, a broadcast goes out that there's a ShotSpotter hit on 10th and Lucas.
This is a very large shot, so when I play this, you'll hear how large this weapon is. When the officers pulled into this intersection here, the first thing they found was a body on the ground. The officers started asking the dispatcher, where should we go? How should we look at the scene? Where exactly did ShotSpotter say? And in this case, ShotSpotter is saying it's on the rooftop. They found the perpetrator. He was still sitting up there. He was smoking cigarettes. He was disassembling his weapon, but he was not making any attempts to flee. He really believed that he was going to be able to get away later when everybody left.
I think it's a smart technology, and specifically in the way that it filters out other ambient sounds that are not gunshots.
I can play you a scenario here. That would be an incident coming in right this second somewhere. Oh, it's a firecracker.
To date this year, we've been involved in helping get medical aid to 67 people that they believe would have died had they not been brought to the scene immediately.
It's clearly part of the future and of technology coming in and enhancing our performance.
That video from Good magazine. Another technological advance, now immortalized on video. It involves driving with an iPhone. Not driving while talking on an iPhone, actually driving by iPhone. I'm not sure why exactly, but this is interesting from Waterloo Labs.
To be able to drive the car, we have to control three things: the gas, the brake, and the steering. To do this, we have a couple of motors that we've ripped out of the power windows. They have a bunch of wrenches that are going to press the gas and the brake pedals. Up here, we have another motor that's geared up with a motorcycle chain to the steering column. To control all of those motors, we have a compact Rio real-time controller that we're talking to wirelessly. All of this wireless communication can be done with LabVIEW on a laptop, with an iPhone, or with a modified Power Wheels.
This is the modified Power Wheels that we're using to control the car. We have a potentiometer hooked up to the steering to control that angle. We have an optical encoder that we built to tell how fast we're going, and we're sending all of this data back to the laptop using a wireless data acquisition device.
If you want to control the car with your iPhone, there's an app for that. John Boyles wrote this one for us so that we can just change these sliders in order to control the pedals and steering. And so right now, we're going to
Next week, to compete, the Droid is coming out with an airliner app to remind pilots that they passed Minneapolis 20 minutes ago. Just kidding. Video pick number 3. We are decades removed from Muhammad Ali and championship fights that have wide appeal. But did you know there is still a boxing scene in New York City? Here is an excerpt from a New Yorker video that gets into the mind of a rising Brownsville middleweight, Danny Jacobs, currently 18-0 with 15 knockouts.
Brooklyn influenced my style. It just gave me that swagger inside the ring, that little cockiness that pushes me. It makes me want to work hard even when I think I can't do it, or even when all odds are against me. My struggles in growing up in Brownsville have been just to see people get shot. I've seen my family members even getting shot right in front of me. My frame is the mind frame of a Spartan. I'm out for blood, I'm out to seek, to destroy. I have a warrior's mentality. I have no grudges in boxing. Boxing is a sport. Boxing is a profession. And you can never take anything personal. It's people like myself doing things to provide for their families and provide for themselves. So I can't look at another man across the ring and hate him. A lot of guys I feel sorry for because of the brutal beating that I give to them.
Yeah, a lot of guys to feel sorry for out there because unfortunately, for every guy out there with an 18-0 record like Danny, there's probably somebody who's 0-18. Ouch. Video clip 4. One of the earliest film clips ever made is now on YouTube thanks to Cinema Palestine. This is footage of Arab and Jewish and Christian Jerusalem in 1896 when movie-making technology was first being developed. The French firm Lumiere made thousands of these short documentaries. Parisians paid plenty of francs to see them. Now, we're not sure where and when the narration and sound effects were added to this 1896 silent film.
15 years later, the cinema is taking its first steps. Cameramen employed by the Lumiere brothers filming at Jerusalem Station provide the first moving pictures taken in Palestine. From now on, the camera is a recording eye, and what it records is this: a society much like that of Cairo, Damascus, or Beirut, in an Arab city much like any other. By the end of the 19th century, Palestine has 500,000 inhabitants, of whom 30,000 live in Jerusalem. A veiled woman, a Sunni Muslim, one of the majority. An Orthodox Jew. He too turns away from the camera. Here we have an Armenian Pope. Each of the Christian denominations has its church here in the Holy City. The holy places of the three religions are scattered across a few hundred square meters. The Great Mosque is close to Christ's tomb. Further along at the foot of the Wailing Wall, a Jew is reciting a prayer. He is wearing a Turkish tabush, and though he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Jews form half the population of Jerusalem, but in the country as a whole, they make up less than 5% of the total. Christians account for 10% and Muslims 85%.
Fascinating human history, fascinating film history, 1896. And video pick number 5 is historical too. Last year, shortly before he died, former Major League pitcher Doc Ellis was interviewed on NPR and told the story of how he pitched a no-hitter in 1970 for the Pittsburgh Pirates in an altered state. He was on the drug LSD, he says. That radio clip is now an animated video from No Mas TV.
There were times when the ball was hit back at me, I jumped because I thought it was coming fast, but the ball was coming slow. Third baseman come by and grabbed the ball and threw somebody out. I never caught a ball from the catcher with 2 hands because I thought that was a big old ball. And then sometimes it looked small. One time I covered first base and I caught the ball and I tagged the base all in one motion. I said, "Ooh, I just made a touchdown." I didn't pay no attention to the score. You know, I'm trying to get the batters out. And I'm throwing a crazy game. I'm hitting people, walking people, throwing balls in the dirt. They're going everywhere.
Now we go for the pièce de résistance. We move to the bottom of the ninth on a no-hitter, leading 2-0.
It was easier to pitch with the LSD because I was so used to medicating myself. That's the way I was dealing with the fear of failure. The fear of losing, the fear of winning. It's just that it was part of the game. You know, you get to the major leagues and you say, I got to stay here. What do I need?
Everybody in our bullpen is standing and walking around nervously. They want to run and grab Doc. Now, 2 balls, 2 strikes, and here's the pitch. Strike 3, he got it! They're going after him, he got it! They're mobbing Doc Ellis on a no-hitter!
At least that's how Doc Ellis himself told it. That was well before steroids, during the era of performance-detracting drugs, or so we thought. And those are this week's online video picks. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Did you see the investigative report in the Times last week about the Pacific garbage patch, a growing mass of trash the size of Texas floating north of Hawaii? Not only is this an important environmental story, but a journalistic breakthrough, too. The report was funded in part by ordinary citizens via Spot.us, a nonprofit website project that supports freelance journalists with small donations. Perhaps this is a model way to keep investigative journalism alive when newspapers can't afford such expenses. With us via Skype from Oakland, California, new journalism entrepreneur and Spot.us staffer David Cohn, and here in New York, Du Lin Tu, a new media producer who also teaches about his craft at Columbia University. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Brian.
Hello. David, tell us more about Spot.us. What is it?
Sure. Spot.us is trying to pioneer, again, what we call community-funded reporting, which is the act of distributing the cost of hiring a reporter across a lot of different people. So if you get 50 people to give $20 each, that's enough to hire a reporter to do a story that they might not be able to do otherwise. Another part of it is trying to, sort of modernize freelancing, because freelancing is traditionally one-to-one relationships. You have to know the editor. And I was a freelancer for a while, and I wanted to see a system where I could pitch the world. And so that's what freelancers do on Spot.us. They pitch multiple editors at once so that they can combine and collaborate. And they're also pitching the world because the public now can have a freelance budget.
What are your leading examples of Spot Us work that has been funded this way?
Sure. Well, of course, the Pacific Garbage Patch is probably the best well-known because it was published in the New York Times. We've also worked with other local news organizations here in the Bay Area, like the Oakland Tribune. We funded a story looking into potholes in Oakland. If you live in Oakland, potholes, believe me, they're a problem you're aware of. And we've also done a story with San Francisco Magazine where we followed the trash, find out what happens to your recycling. Right now, we're local to the Bay Area and also Los Angeles. But we're also figuring out how the platform can expand to other regions. So again, we've done all kinds of topics from the police in Oakland to the city budget in San Francisco.
Stu, in your opinion, is this unambiguously a good thing? Is it sometimes good, sometimes bad? What do you think?
Well, especially now at this point, I don't think there's any... It's a fact now that we're in journalism, we're in a point of crisis, but also in times of crisis, it's a great time for opportunity, and David is doing unequivocally good stuff. And when I say good stuff, I mean he's empowering journalists to produce journalism in a time where these avenues are closing down in areas such as investigative journalism, but not just investigative, everyday local reporting. So we need in this industry right now to figure out ways just like this and other ways of really funding an important social need, which is journalism.
Does it become, in a sense, though, journalism by popularity contest? Individuals can go on this site and see the projects that are proposed for funding and say, oh, I'd like to see this story, oh, I'd like to see that story, rather than editors making the decisions about what's really important to fund?
Well, I mean, there's you know, the age-old question of do we give them what they want or do we give them what they need? And I think that's an incorrect question these days. I think the public is smart enough to know what they want and what they need. And this is just another way of demonstrating that. When the reporter brings up a story to be voted upon, there's a bit of pre-reporting that goes into it. They bring up the story and they need funds to finish the story. And this is the public's role to say, you know what, that doesn't affect my community. This affects my community. I'd like to hear that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the more that us journalists stop having this wall between me and my audience, the better. I think that it is, you know, journalism is a fun endeavor. It's an inspiring endeavor, but in the most, you know, best sense, it's a practical endeavor in terms of informing the public. And if the public wants a bit of information, I don't think that's a bad thing.
David, what was Spot Us's relationship with the New York Times on the Garbage Patch story? I would have thought the New York Times still, despite everything, has the money to fund its own journalism.
You know, I obviously can't speak on behalf of the New York Times, so everything I say is, you know, my understanding of it. But, you know, this was a freelancer who approached the Times and said, you know, here's something that's going on in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I have access. Are you guys interested in the story? And from my understanding, the New York Times was interested, but the travel costs were prohibitive, close to $10,000. And I don't, again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the New York Times, but I don't imagine that they would have the budget to throw $10,000 to someone just for the travel expenses with a freelancer. Nor do they necessarily, again, I don't know, but would they send a staff person out for a month and a half, which is how long this took, to do that. So I think this is a good example where, you know, the cost prohibitiveness of it doesn't lend itself to freelancing, and Spot Us, the Spot Us community was able to then raise those travel funds for her.
And dude, that story did draw quickly at least one criticism from someone named Megan Marber, who said the piece would have been better off as blog entries, and for all that money spent on all this global travel for the protagonist brought nothing substantially new factually to the table. Did you see that? Do you have an opinion on this?
You know, I don't understand what that means by it should have been better as blogging. Again, this goes back to old discussions of, you know, here's real journalism, here's blogging, and here's the right way of doing journalism, here's, you know, the citizens, layman's, poor, you know, idiot's way of doing journalism. And I think that's, again, a wrong way of approaching it. We are at a time of change here, and a good time of change. So that your viewers know, David was a former student of mine. And David, I forget how old you are, but I love this. I love the fact that David, who just a couple years ago graduated from school, is rethinking journalism. I think, you know, I'm not that old in the game, but I'm old enough to know that I think there's a lot of us with one way of thinking. And you know, questions like this should be blogging, that should be journalism, I don't even get that. But to further answer your question is, I don't see anything that is bad with a different story seeing the light of day. That I love to read stories. That is journalism. It's storytelling.
David, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, and I should also say, Du was one of my favorite professors at Columbia, so any credit I get actually goes directly back to him. But the criticism was good, except it wasn't saying that it should have been a blog post. It was that Lindsay actually did produce a blog. And they said that the blog was better and more interesting than the New York Times piece, which sort of had that classic New York Times sort of journalism tone. Again, I think that might not be the right discussion for Spot Us. I think, you know, we're particularly looking at the funding and how to fund that kind of trip. I think you can, you know, there are probably some people that liked the New York Times article better than the blog, and some people that like the blog better. You know, the reporter produced both, actually. So I think that might be a side discussion, and you know, I also agree with Du in that it's almost going backwards. You know, some people, you know, like mashed potatoes, and some people like French fries. But the real thing right now is you know, looking at how journalism is done and how to reinvent that in all kinds of different ways, and let the public decide for themselves what's best.
David, are there certain types of stories that people are tending to fund on Spot Us? Are you seeing any patterns there?
It's not that I'm seeing any patterns, although environmental stories so far have done better, and that's particularly in the Bay Area. I think in Los Angeles, it's too early to tell if that same thing holds. I do think that there are certain types of stories that don't work on Spot Us. Obviously, Spot Us is not good for breaking news. You know, you can't say, there's a fire across the street, let's raise money and I'll go cover it. And I also don't think it works for certain types of investigations. If you're going to investigate the mafia, it might not be the best thing to, you know, pronounce that ahead of time. But, you know, I think the best stories on Spot Us, or the best pitches, are those that answer fundamental questions. Like what is happening to my recycling in San Francisco, and that's different from city to city. Or, you know, what is happening with the budget cuts? Exactly where are they being cut? You know, things that answer questions that people want to know about tend to do better when they're answering a fundamental question of civic life.
So, Du, give us some context here. Where does this fit in the pantheon of new experiments for funding journalism? What is that world now?
Right now, I think Spot Us is just the tip of the iceberg. We, as journalists, the industry, we have to find ways of being able to pay ourselves to do this type of work. Journalism is a calling, but it's also a business. And so we have to think hard. We have to find out new ways of doing exactly what Dave is doing, getting money to fund these projects so we can do the next project. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. At Columbia, about 250 students go through that program every year. Nationally, that's something like 200,000 undergrad journalism students go through that process. There's not 200,000 journalism jobs. So I think the future is a lot of entrepreneurialism. I think people will figure a way of making a living in telling stories, but it's not going to be the traditional, I work at the local paper, I collect a paycheck, and I work my way up. It's going to be a lot of innovative ways of telling stories. But that said, to separate the dollar from someone, the general public, you're going to have to produce really compelling work, and I think that ultimately is a good thing for journalism.
And some of that, David, is hyper-local, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Spot Us is local, again, in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles. And, you know, we did that for two reasons. One is we're funded by the Knight Foundation, which particularly looks at local. But I think that's also where we're feeling a little bit of the hurt. You know, I think there will always be a New York Times, you know, there will always be a Washington Post and a CNN. But what we really are threatened to lose right now are those metro papers, the Boston Globe or the San Francisco Chronicle. They're sort of feeling the crunch, and you know, democracy still happens at a local level. People still live in local communities, and I think that there is a real market or desire there for real good news and information. So a lot of the innovation that's happening, a lot of the entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs can mean innovator or small business owner, that's happening at the local level. I think we're seeing a lot of local startups here in the Bay Area. There's the San Francisco Public Press, there's Oakland Local, there's a bunch that are really trying to dig down deep into their local communities and serve those needs that aren't being met necessarily anymore.
Well, congratulations on Spot Us, and here's to keeping innovation alive. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Coming up, Donors Choose, where your modest donations pay for classroom projects that aren't in the budget, just like journalism projects. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with a CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Say, are you worried about H1N1? You know, swine flu. Well, CUNY says protect yourself from hidden horrors. Here's how. After touching public surfaces, don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. Flu is also spread when infected people cough at you. Sneeze into a tissue, never your bare hands. Or use your elbow. Wash often with soap and water. Or use an alcohol-based hand cleanser. There are two kinds of flu shots this season. Consult your doctor or healthcare provider on the regular and H1N1 vaccinations. Most importantly, if you feel sick and have fever, stay home. Yes, a little caution goes a long way.
For more information, visit our website, cuny.edu, and click on H1N1 Update.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. It started in the Bronx 10 years ago. A high school social studies teacher could not accept the scarcity of learning materials in his classroom. So Charles Best came up with the idea of DonorsChoose.org. Ordinary citizens could go to that website, and if they liked a project a teacher proposed, they could help fund it with a few bucks, just like that journalism model we were seeing before. 10 years later, Donors Choose is nationwide. It buys everything from pencils to microscopes. To date, more than 200,000 classrooms have been helped. Check out their promotional video, and you will see one grassroots idea that appeals in high places.
Through Donors Choose, ordinary citizens can directly fund projects initiated by enterprising public school teachers.
Teachers request dictionaries, science kits, field trips, resources that their students need to thrive. Then you can give to the project request that most inspires you with a donation of any amount. And DonorsChoose.org delivers the materials to the school.
It's such a simple, wonderful idea. It connects individual donors with individual classrooms and individual teachers and individual projects. You know exactly who you're helping and how you're helping them.
It's tough getting a dollar. I don't like it.
So how exactly does Donors Choose work? It's clearly doing good at the classroom level, but do micro donations like this truly build community? Joining us is Charles Best, founder of Donors Choose. Also with us, former teacher and executive director now of Donors Choose for the Eastern region, Talia Theodore. Welcome, both of you. Thank you. And Charles, tell us more about the beginning of DonorsChoose.org. What were you going through?
Yeah, for sure. I was a social studies teacher in the Bronx for 5 years, teaching not too far away from Talia. And my colleagues and I would have the same conversation over and over again in the teacher's lunchroom about microscopes we needed to do a proper science experiment, a field trip that we knew would really bring the subject matter to life that we wanted to take our students on, books that we wanted them to read. And we'd spend our own money on copy paper and pencils, but then for the most part, we saw our kids going without the materials they needed for a good education, and we teachers had a tough time innovating because we'd come up with these ideas in the teacher's lunchroom and they wouldn't go past the lunchroom doors because we didn't have an avenue to get even small amounts of funding.
Let's see, I think we have your website homepage up. I guess we can't see it. There we go. So do you want to tell us what we're looking at? This will describe how it works.
Yeah, for sure. This is the homepage of DonorsChoose.org. You can see a little workflow diagram at the top, and you can see from that sort of photo slideshow the ability for donors to browse classroom projects either by looking at photos or by applying search criteria. You're on our search page right now, and as you can see across the top, you could express a really personal area of interest.
So somebody there, I don't know if the print is big enough for people to read on the screen, private trumpet lessons for my jazz orchestra students. Yeah. Somebody soliciting donations for that.
That's
correct?
right. That's right. That's exactly right. And when you check out a classroom project request on our site, you read an essay of a few paragraphs that the teacher has written about a student learning experience that they want to make possible, and then you see the exact resources needed for that experience to happen, to come to life.
Let's see, can I search my zip code here? Is this possible?
I bet. If you, well, it definitely is. If you go to See Projects or even, the Search Projects bar. Yes, you could go ahead and enter your, what is your zip code?
Okay, Talia, help me out here. This is going to be 10034. Those of you in Upper Manhattan will recognize it. So let's click and let's see who needs money in Washington Heights and Inwood and missing the sound of music. All right, what's that? Are you familiar with this?
Yep. So this looks like a kindergarten classroom in Upper Manhattan who's requesting a CD player, essentially a music center for students to help incorporate music into the classroom and into instruction. I actually was a first grade teacher, so I definitely recognize the need to keep young learners engaged. So this is a project that's needing about $200. And anybody could give a donation, fund the entire project, or as little as $1.
And we saw different click-throughs there, give $25, give $45, so it's structured so that it encourages you to give more rather than less, but you have some choices.
You have complete choice, yes.
Who does it?
Who
gives?
The people that give? I mean, I think DonorsChoose appeals to people from all walks of life. So there are corporate partners, companies that are headquartered here in the Eastern region that like DonorsChoose and want to structure their giving to classrooms through our site. And then there are everyday folks who have $25, $50 to give and want to make sure that if they have a passion for autism or music or math or science, that's being promoted in classrooms and can give at any price point.
How did you first hear about this? How did you get involved?
Right. So I'm currently on staff at DonorsChoose, but 9 years ago I was a public school teacher, a brand new teacher at an elementary school in the Bronx. I was teaching first grade, excited about teaching the 30 little people showing up at my door that first day to read and write, and walked into a classroom that basically was 4 walls, 30 desks, 2 packs of chalk. And for me, DonorsChoose.org was something that was word of mouth in the Bronx. Teachers talked about the site where teachers could write a short proposal, post it online, and have people support the materials that you needed in your classroom. So my introduction was as a teacher user. I had a reading rug for my classroom funded that first year.
So, Charles, this is inspiring and heartwarming on one level. On another level, it is pathetic that something like this has to fill in for fundamental failures of the public education system if they have to get donations for chalk, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah. 50% of the project requests on our site go beyond what you might expect the system or the taxpayer to cover. A field trip to Washington, D.C. to see the Supreme Court consider a case, or a pet hedgehog, or therapeutic horseback riding for disabled students. The other half of the project requests on our site do make you say, damn, I can't believe that there's a classroom that doesn't have a set of dictionaries or doesn't have basic art supplies for the art teacher. And that's exactly the kind of reaction we hope to elicit in our website visitors. 70% of our donors have never before given to public schools. So this is really their first encounter with what's really going on in public schools in low-income communities. And so 60% of our donors say that their experience on DonorsChoose.org made them more interested in systemic reform. So far from making people think like they just solved a problem at a micro level and the government no longer needs to step up, they actually come out of their donation experience politically energized to demand that the system do a better job, because now they feel like they have a personal relationship with a particular classroom, and this problem now has a face, and it's no longer just a statistic in a newspaper article.
And you are getting some big name support. Here is a clip of Stephen Colbert in character on his show. See how he weaves the plug for Donors Choose right into the Colbert Report.
Here's a look at some of the projects that still need your help. A teacher we'll call Miss H in Oregon needs $1,800 so her 10th and 11th graders can get 25 updated history textbooks. Or you could just give me $1,800 and I'll mail them a piece of paper that says, God did it. Now, if you want to help the class of Texas teacher Mrs. M, you can donate to her student-produced newscast. I support young pundits looking to break into the business, and I give all of them the same advice. Stay away from my time slot or I will crush you. Or you can donate to Mrs. G's class in California, which needs a new computer to replace their early 90s era Macintosh LC2. I believe we have footage of the students starting it up.
So it's national.
It is. Donors Choose serves public schools in all 50 states, kindergarten through 12th grade.
Now, did people get that, you think, from the way Colbert presented it? Was it clear that the Donors Choose part of that routine was serious?
I think so. I mean, there's actual teachers. So when you go to the DonorsChoose.org site, every essay that you see is actually written by a public school teacher. Mrs. H, Mrs. T, Mr. B are actual classroom teachers. So I think people get it, and it's easier to hear that they're actually classrooms with outdated history books when Stephen Colbert is prompting you to take a look.
It's a little bit like product placement on a sitcom, right? Though instead of, you know, diet something or other, it's Donors Choose woven into the Colbert Report.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And
how did you get that? Did you work with him on that?
You know, when Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist, went on the Colbert Report, he talked for just a couple minutes about Craigslist and then talked for 4 or 5 minutes about DonorsChoose.org. So we are very grateful to Craig Newmark for helping to introduce DonorsChoose.org to Stephen Colbert. And to put a couple of figures, we looked at the numbers recently in terms of the number of kids in public schools who have books, art supplies, field trips, and other resources as a result of Stephen Colbert rallying his viewers. Right. And you
can quantify it.
Yeah, more than 100,000 kids in public schools have materials thanks to what Stephen Colbert has done. He's done a couple interesting things. One, he launched a philanthropic presidential straw poll a little more than a year ago, where people could donate to a classroom project in honor of their favorite candidate. And each donation pushed that candidate higher up in what Stephen Colbert called a straw poll that makes a difference. And then he came back not long after that and used the same technology to rally his viewers to support our troops serving in Iraq and Afghanistan by supporting their children's education, by going to DonorsChoose.org and giving to some of the hundreds of classroom requests posted by teachers at military serving public schools. And Stephen Colbert pitted the Army against the Navy, against the Air Force to see who could help more kids of military families.
Was that before or after he got his Marine's haircut? Oh, never mind. Do people kind of get nervous doing it the first time? There may be some reluctance out there to do it the first time. People don't know if they're going to get spammed for the rest of their life or what. You think there's a barrier to cross?
I think if anything, it might be, you know, price is a barrier. At DonorsChoose.org, you can give for as little as $1. I think one of the key things is, one of the key pieces of the model is that you give and you actually hear back from the classroom. So you get photos of the students who actually benefited from your donation. You get a letter from the teacher detailing the learning experience. You get a handwritten thank you letter from the students actually telling you how those books or the art supplies or the microscopes were put to use. So I think that once people get the feedback, especially if they gave $10 to a project, they're hooked in the barrier.
And it's real. It really goes to the individual classrooms. I think we're seeing some photos of some of those recipients and the way they come back. So you could say, oh, look, there's the glue that I funded, or whatever it is. Although, you know, Kiva is getting in some trouble right now for their version of this model, and that maybe the money doesn't go directly to the people they think it does, but rather to some umbrella organization. This is going right to the class?
Yeah, I mean, technology definitely allows us to, we show the cost report. So as a donor, you can see line by line what's made up in that total project cost report, the titles of the books, how many microscopes, all of the items that are going into the project are available before you've decided if you'd like to fund the project. So it's pretty transparent.
All right. Well, this is very exciting.
Thank you.
It's also very scary that we have to rely on this. Do you have a favorite current project?
Oh man, there are 20,000 classroom project requests live on our site at any given moment, and that means someone can express the most personal area of interest, and there will likely be project requests that match. But in terms of,
well, we search by zip code. Can you also search by topic area?
Oh, absolutely.
Or education?
Absolutely. I'll give you one anecdote. This writer for Fortune magazine was once doing a story on Kiva and DonorsChoose.org as the two websites that Fortune magazine thought might change the face of philanthropy. And the writer, when we were talking, said that his personal passion was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest. And he might have almost been implying that he wouldn't be personally donating at our site because he cared about salmon in the Northwest. And before he left the room, I did a keyword search on DonorsChoose.org for salmon, and up came 5 classroom project requests, all centering on salmon in the Northwest. The second match was a teacher in an Oregon high school who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and for that he needed hip waders for his students to maintain the hatchery. And the top result for this keyword search was a teacher on an island off Alaska teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. All of her students are Native Alaskans, and they had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon and wanted to share that work.
Congratulations on Donors Choose, 10 years, and good luck.
Thanks so much, Brian.
With the project, DonorsChoose.org. Finally, tonight, Mayor Bloomberg last week announced a new redevelopment plan for Coney Island, and it could use some new commercial life. From Jason Lamb and his company called Sky Shutter, here's Coney Island as seen earlier this year from the vantage point of a helicopter. This is actually from the vantage point of a toy helicopter, remote controlled. Pretty amazing. Coney Island at dusk, it appears to be. Makes me nostalgic, also hungry for Nathan's hot dog. And that's it for this week's show. We are here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime online at brianlehrer.tv. And tune into my daily radio show, 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio. Tomorrow morning, websites that translate between English and Chinese for cross-cultural understanding. That's 10 a.m. on WNYC, 93.9 FM, and AM 820. Have a great night.